Campbell.
Andy.
Andy.
Yeah. What's your first name?
What?
No. Yes.
Where are you staying? Oh, okay.
Are you ready?
I ask everyone because I usually thread. I don't have enough time with an hour with that kind of conversation, and I like to refer like, oh, and Allison said or Lena said it's a little easier, and then I can ask her. I don't have to wait for her to get back to the microphone to. I just think it's more personal and nicer.
How did you think it went?
It was great. I can't believe how many people wanted to be in a feminist conversation. Like, huge. It was
really
hugely
amazing.
Popular, and it filled up, so you can tell that people loved it because they were tweeting it. When something packs up like that, like I did last year, I got another people tell me best panel yet. I mean, that's 2 years in a row people said
like
best
a quarter of
panel
the people
conference.
were on their laptops and while you were going and emailing things back and forth. It was amazing.
Tell us a little bit about what was covered.
So I did a conversation called "Everything I Need to Know About the Web I Learned from Feminism," and I've wanted to do it for a little while, and sort of framing the conversation around, as I like to call it, the Pall Mall of theory of feminism, that you're soaking in it, and that the web's already feminist, which is very different than the way I think. A lot of pop culture likes to talk about feminism as just a lot of whininess, as opposed to saying, oh, here's actually historically what it did, here's the changes that it made, the kind of difference between what's personal and what's political, that changing. Social media being a completely almost nothing but what used to be called so-called women's work, which no one studied or monetized or organized at one point, and now is like half the businesses on the web, not to mention every company has got to focus on customer support based and marketing based on this kind of way of interacting, so just more relationship oriented stuff. And I had some, amazing people. Obviously, Dana Boyd is kind of a standout because she knows just a ton about and studies, the way people interact socially. But you could tell people.
Betty Flowers was great.
Betty Flowers is awesome. You can tell when people are just hungry for conversation, and it was definitely something people wanted to get into. And I wish we'd been able to mix with diversity in a broader sense. It says to me we need more space for live stuff. We're going to dig into race and class and gender, and hopefully within that, faith and point of view and approach to the web, so that it's not just about like kind of the add-on, old school identity politics. I think that's a very alienating approach to a lot of people and very.
But I think there's also something to be said in terms of diversity for the fact that you bring a really bottom line queer sensibility to the panel. That's about
I mean, it's queer theory and it's feminist theory, but I mean,
exactly.
The other thing that was really interesting is that those identity categories are no longer stable because everyone is making and remaking them. I mean, when we talked about the social networking sites, there's a new one every other year.
And
there's a new
really
building up and
interesting points about like if you live your life. I mean, I made a choice to shift to my life, and people are going to say, "Well, you have privilege, and here's why." Well, I mean, it wasn't. I had some privilege, and some I didn't. It was painful and difficult. I mean, I don't make the kind. I now make very different income than I once made, even though I had a certain education that would let me do it, in part because I chose to do something entrepreneurial. I think anybody who does anything entrepreneurial always, goes back to take the risk. And because it's that kind of unified identity, I wanted a sense of integration to be publicly myself.
Right.
Yeah, there's a definite, but what's interesting to me is where I was once a business development executive, and for me to say these things at work, believe me, were a problem. Now that I've developed a lot of work around it and an audience, and now go to companies and they hire me to teach them how to do it. So it's kind of interesting. I can come in to the same place that once said we're uncomfortable with that and saying, well, how do you do that? Because the larger culture is moving in this direction. I don't really see that stopping. And yes, obviously people very have good points of people trying to work in government and other kinds of jobs where they say, the idea you're going to live some kind of squeaky clean life where no one is ever going to publicly think you've done anything quote unquote wrong. Well, our notions of what are wrong change, which I know upsets some people morally. But hopefully, I think when you're trying to be in the process of engaged relationship with people, what you have is a case. So I'm just thinking of this as we're talking, so it might not be concise. But if you've done something that someone else thinks is bad or wrong, but you're trying to actively have a relationship with them, then you have to deal with them feeling like what you do is wrong or bad, and that's very different than just saying, you broke rules, that's bad, follow the rules. It's very different to say, well, I want to know you, and in order to know you and be around you, I have to deal with that in a certain way. And I think there are different ways that come at the same behavior, or the same way of being. And I think it,
Well, and it speaks to having broader and larger conversations. I have conservative friends, but if I were to judge their morality, I view many of their moral choices as amoral in terms of how they
but it doesn't mean you stop. But it doesn't mean you stop.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you don't engage and that you
we need more
don't
space.
discuss.
I want to have more engagement with people who are self-identified as conservative. I don't know how useful, personally, I don't really like the identifier as liberal and conservative.
Right.
I don't find it liberal very useful for me. I'm sure people will call me that, and that's fine.
It was just an example. But
no, I think it's the conversation we have the least of.
Yeah.
We have a lot of, let's have different medias and different little realms. You belong to your church, and I'll belong to my little world.
It becomes more stratified.
Right.
I want to make sure that we get your plug-in about Plutopia.
Okay, so hold on one second. Hold. We're going to wrap this one.
Oh.
So that